Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I've been laying track. Well, not today, it was a few days ago, but you can see here how much I've got done. At a glance it doesn't really look like a whole lot, and by now I would have got the other end of the layout done too, but at this point I'm having a bit of trouble finding the correct points. You might remember in the last video, I discovered my baseboards didn't quite line up properly, and that's because, obviously, I'm an amateur at best. I gave it some thought, and while I probably could have dealt with the issue while track laying, I think in the long run, re-drilling the holes for the bolts that hold everything all together is the best way to fix it with fewer headaches down the track. Get it? Track because it's a railway? You can see in the pictures how I clamped the boards together, and I probably should have done it this way to begin with. Obviously this meant that I had to remove the alignment dowels, which was a bit difficult because of the glue, but I did get it done. And at this point I'm not sure I'm going to put them back. The layout is going to sit on a table, so it doesn't really need all that much vertical alignment. Also, I was just feeling really lazy. I did think ahead though, and drilled some pilot holes for them. That way if I feel a need to, I can reinstall them. With that done, it's time for track. This tube of Peco Code 55 Flex track arrived a while ago, and this should be more than enough for my needs. I even ordered extra because I know I'm going to make mistakes. To go with that, enough sets of Peco Unifrog points for one end of the railway. I understand these to be a good choice if you plan to use DCC, and eventually I do. These can be installed as they are, with no insulating rail joiners needed. These come with a wire that you use to power the frog, but you don't have to hook that up right away, if at all. That means you can get the track working sooner without having to worry about any switches or additional wiring, and that sounds good to me. I've also got these. Peco Twistlock point motors. These are more expensive than some others, but they seemed like the easiest to install and replace if need be. Also, there's no need to cut any big slots into the baseboard. To get started, I soldered some lengths of flex track together. The corners at the ends of the baseboards are going to be longer than a single piece of flex track is, so soldering the flex track together should make it just a little bit easier to install those curves. It does make sense that joining the rails on a corner would be more difficult than connecting straight sections with no horizontal tension in them. I used some blue tack to hold the track in place because it was really annoying to have it slide away if I so much as brushed the soldering iron against it. Speaking of soldering iron, I got one that turns soldering into a rave. Unz, 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 unz.
That's not what that is, Herbert. It's just flicker due to the frame rates and electrical frequency in the LEDs not being aligned, idiot!
Ah, yes. I'm not very experienced with soldering, and even though I did remove a lot of the sleepers, I did still manage to melt some. Could be worse, I guess. In the end, the tracks are soldered to each other, and they seem like they're going to stay that way. It seemed to me that a smart first step would be to determine where the points should go. I would really have preferred to use a set of curved points coming from the main loop into the passing track along the front edge of the board, but they don't have Unifrog versions of those yet, so this will do. I found that the sleepers kind of interfered with each other if I tried to connect the points too close to each other, so I couldn't just connect all four of them together here. I did clip some of the sleepers back a bit, and I'm sure I could make it fit, it just seemed a bit tight. I would just put a small section of track in between the two connected sets of points. No big deal. If I wasn't powering my points, this would all be so much easier. Before these can be glued down, I've got to install the point motors. Something I like about these Peco Twistlock motors is that they come with a template. It can be a little bit fiddly to line things up, but it's not especially difficult. You line the rails up with the green lines, and then the point bar thingy that holds the blades together lines up with the black line. The other coloured lines are for other scales, so if you are doing N scale, you don't need to worry about them. I gently tape the template in place with my nice pink gaffer's tape. There are two 1.5mm holes to drill, and it might be obvious, it's best to do this as straight vertically as you can. Then, a single larger hole goes here. The instructions call for a 6mm hole, but I went with 7mm because I can't follow simple instructions. Or an extra millimeter seemed like a good idea. You can position this so that it's on either side of the track, though in larger scales it goes in the centre. It occurred to me after drilling this one that maybe putting the hole on the side away from the front of the layout would be a good idea, though it probably doesn't really make that much of a difference in the end, and a lot of the hole is covered by the track itself anyway. Now to install the point motors. There isn't too much to do under the board here, which is probably great for those with layouts that can't be turned on their sides or upside down. All you need to do is put the two halves of the little plastic retaining thingies onto the screws, and then screw them into the holes we drilled. Obviously the small holes. This is rather easy. Well, it is a bit fiddly because the screw isn't magnetic, and because I just like to drop things, but in theory, it is easy. I didn't really do a good job filming this, I mostly just filmed my arms. If anyone wants a better, more in-depth video on this, let me know in the comments below. I may do that when I install the next set of these. Once you've got those retaining doodads in place, it's just a matter of sliding the actuating rod through the hole, and then twisting and locking the motor in place. I suspect this might be why they call them Twistlock. When you're ready to put the points down, you poke the actuating rod through the hole in the throw bar, or whatever that's called. The rod will have to be trimmed, and fortunately you can just untwist and unlock the point motor and take it out and do that. I did a little bit of a test to make sure that things work, and obviously when the track is not properly secured like this, things are going to shift, but I just wanted to see it working. Gluing the points into place seemed like a reasonable thing to do next, so that's what I did. I would prefer not to glue the points into one position, so I avoid putting the glue where the moving parts are. That probably makes sense. The important thing here is to make sure the points have full range of motion, which is to say the blades should be all the way against the outer rails. I don't know the actual technical terms here, but I'm sure you get what I mean. Next, I glued down my first bit of flex track. This leads to the edge of the board for when I want to replicate Back to the Future 3. Or maybe I can lie and say that it's to represent a branch line or something like that. I didn't motorize the points leading this way because it's not going to be used all that often, and I figured saving a few dollars was a good idea. The way I've glued the track down is pretty much the same as how I did the track bed. A bead of glue, which is then spread out, and I've used some packaging here, but you could use your finger or a fancy brush if you're a fancy kind of person. I installed a crossover between the two main lines next, and this is pretty much the same as before. I cut a small bit of flex track to go between the 2 points, and initially it looked like it was going to fit pretty well, but I did have to cut another slightly longer bit of track for this later, which was a very minor annoyance, but not really a big deal. This is why I wanted to use flex track, so that I wouldn't be dependent on predefined bits of track. It made sense to then drill some more holes for some more Twistlock motors, and it seemed efficient to do both of these at the same time. Again, the actuator bars slide into the holes in the throw bar, and the points can be glued into place. A bit of weight to hold things down is a good idea here. Here, you can see things haven't quite gone perfectly. There's a slight kink here, and I don't like it. I really should have been more careful when lining things up. The choice here was to either have the tracks be perfectly straight, with point motors not throwing switches all the way, or a bit of a kink with properly functioning switches. Or, I guess, re-drill holes and reinstall things. I made my choice, and I'm hoping this doesn't cause issues down the line. I did test it, and it seems okay, and really it's not the most horrendous bit of track work in the world. Not to be discouraged, I kept going. The end curves were a bit challenging, keeping in mind that I haven't done any track laying since I was in my teens, and I'm now not a teen. Anyway, you've obviously got to be careful when making the initial bend. You don't want to form any kinks or anything, and it seemed like a good idea to start at one end and then slowly bend the curve into the right shape. Getting the track to have the right curvature moves the rails in the sleepers, so you don't have the nice straight ends that you started with, so that means you've got to cut the rails, and maybe do a bit of filing to get things lined up properly. To make this easy, I bought a set of Xuron or Xuron rail clippers, and these work rather well. You get nice flat cuts, and they barely needed any cleanup at all. I secured the tracks at one end first, where they connected to the existing track. The idea here is that they'll stay put when I position the other end. I think the important thing here is that you get the track to as close to the curvature as you want before installing it, so you don't move the rails at the end you've already connected. You can use weights, or various objects with weight, and pins can be helpful too. This is obviously just to make sure that things don't move too much. Here's the joint I got at the end of my first curve. It's not flawless, but it's not bad either. It's definitely a bit easier to get a nice straight joint when you've got a good straight bit of track to connect. That's probably stating the obvious, isn't it? I kept laying track, and I think I did a pretty good job. I used a Peco track gauge thing, the little red piece of plastic, to make sure that the two main lines were at least the minimum distance apart. I felt like this was most important for the corners. I'm not especially concerned about realistic distances between the tracks there, mostly I just don't want trains to crash into each other. Also, you'll note that I haven't laid the track all the way to the centre where the two boards will join. The plan is to do that after the curves and points and stuff on the other board is in place as well. I feel like if I do it that way, I have a better chance of everything lining up nice and straight, or at least straight-ish. Here's the fun bit. I haven't wired in any power feeders or anything like that, but why not run a train anyway? It's poorly lit, but my little pannier tank and a couple of fruit D-vans is my first train. Obviously it can only run back and forth, but the track does work, which is the main thing. There were no derailments, so I was pretty happy with this result. It's not quite as satisfying as just being able to let the train run, but it is rather satisfying to see my work, well, working. There is a couple of spots where the train stalls a bit, and that could be because I didn't actually connect wires to the track, I just held them there, but I'm pretty confident it's mostly because there are patches where I inadvertently got glue on the rails and didn't clean them up properly. I will clean those at some point, but for now, I'm just satisfied the train stays on the tracks. And that's it for this installment of my railway adventure. I'm pretty happy with what I've got done. And I really wanted to continue laying track, but I didn't have the stuff to do so. More point motors are on the way, but I am currently having a bit of trouble finding left-hand Unifrog points, at least without having to resort to ordering from overseas, but eventually it'll get done. I don't know what the next model railway video is going to be, but there are a few things that having this track in place opens up. I could start working on terrain, or figuring out the placement for the signal box I've got, which I will probably start building on stream soon, or I could start wiring things in properly, though I think I might leave that until all the track is in place. Anyway, as I said earlier, if you want to see a better, more in-depth video about the Twistlock point motors, let me know in the comments below. I'm probably going to do a video on it anyway, which will include the wiring and such. Anyway, that's it for now. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below. If you've not already done so, why not subscribe here on YouTube for the low price of $0 and 0 cents? Or if you have the means, and you want to help a Herbert Erpaderp do Herbert Erpaderp things, as well as see my videos a bit early before there's any ads, consider becoming a patron. You can find links to Patreon and all of my other things like Discord and social media in the description below. As always, I shall return soon, so until then, be excellent to each other, have a fantastic day, and thanks for watching. Farewell.